Welcome. You are at a workshop here at the People's Music Network, Summer Convergence. I'm Sandy O from Emma's Revolution.
And I'm Pat Humphries.
And we have our wonderful friend David Rovics joining us for a workshop today, sharing, I forget even what it's called, but generally about like, how do you do this? The why you do it is unanswerable.
I think it's something like surviving doing this.
Surviving doing this music. And because we're a nice small group here, we can leave it with, you could unmute if you had to ask a question. What we're thinking of is we'll kind of talk for a while about these kind of issues. If you have a question, you could put it into the chat, or because we can see your faces, you could raise your hand, that kind of thing. And we will leave a period of time at the end for questions and answers in general. So do have questions for us. That's why we're here. Let me turn it over to David to give you an overview of what we're
I also wanted to say, if you put it in the chat and we haven't noticed it, because sometimes they go by quickly, just let us know, wave us to us or something.
And to let you right, and to let you know that this workshop is being recorded. You can change your name if you didn't want your name on the recording, that kind of stuff. But it's just being recorded for PMNers to watch at a future date as well.
Yeah, and so I wrote a booklet back in 2006 called "Sing for Your Supper," which kind of like goes through a lot of the sort of different ways you can try to write music and get it out there in the world so that people might hear it and so that you also might make a few bucks from it. That's sort of the subject of the book, and I wrote an updated book on the subject, which I never published, which I will share with everybody in the workshop in the chat in a minute. And it's kind of like the basic, the sort of framework of the kind of stuff that I have in mind to talk about is really basically in the book is sort of a synopsis version, but and it's very much along the lines of how Pat and Sandy get their music out there too, because we're all doing very much similar stuff, which is kind of why I thought we should do the workshop together, because they're doing a lot of the same stuff that a lot of us are doing, and doing it very well in terms of getting the music out there so that it gets heard and so that they manage to more or less or at least come close to surviving at the occupation, which is quite something. And there's the industry as it is, if we can call it that, the music industry, whether independent or corporate, has collapsed in the past 20 years. And that's been true across the board. And the people who have managed to continue to survive at this strange profession are basically a small number. But there are, those of us who are managing it or almost managing it or something, have some probably useful advice to share on how to navigate the new world of crowdfunding, social media, and no merch, which is kind of the new reality for touring musicians who used to, we were talking about starting with a little bit of a backgrounder, but I mean, that would be my very nutshell backgrounder would be that basically up until maybe 10 years ago, a lot of musicians would make half their money from selling merch, and that's no longer the case. And so that's been an earthquake for a lot of people, along with a lot of other factors that have transformed the whole phenomenon of trying to survive as a musician, such as the cost of commercial real estate, the lack of venues, the shrinking of the venues, the extremely expensive nature of venues, more and more, a lot of other factors that could be talked about. But it's a rapidly transforming reality that we're trying to. It's like surfing, really big waves and seeing if you don't fall off. Basically, we can talk about how we've managed to not fall off too much.
And by merch, I'm assuming that you're mainly referring to CDs or some recordings on some kind of something.
Well, there's a great point, because for me, when I'm curious what it's like for you guys, but for me, the only merch that anybody ever really bought much of was CDs. Maybe because I never hooked up with a successful T-shirt designer or anything, or never had a good enough idea or whatever. But it was always CDs. And then once Spotify came along, I guess possibly partly because of the youthful nature of much of my audience, the CD sales just almost immediately collapsed in 2013, and Got a lot of listeners on Spotify out of the deal, but they don't pay the bills. But that's but they do pay the bills in a roundabout way, and that's something that that we're going to talk about. How to make Spotify listeners pay the bills, even though the direct relationship of them listening to your music does not pay any bills.
Right. The music business and we sort of joke about the music business because the music business that you see is not our music business. We have very little connection to that, but the music business affects us. And the music business, in my experience, and for those of you who were not here earlier, I'm Pat Humphries. I'm half of Emma's Revolution.
I'm Sandy O. I'm the other half of Emma's Revolution.
The music business, you were talking about the sort of collapse of it. I experience the music business as sort of an accordion. There are times when it's been this more from my experience, a more functioning kind of thing, and in its history in relation to my career, there was a time when the music business was run by musicians largely, which meant that the business part of it wasn't the emphasis, but the music part of it was a little more the emphasis of it. And then they started realizing that maybe musicians, especially touring musicians, weren't the best folks to run something that's a business. So then the lawyers kind of moved into those positions. And that's when the music business kind of shrank into something that was much smaller, much more business oriented, much more fewer companies kind of gobbled up other companies, and there was kind of concentrated control. And then, what happened again to the music business, just as I was beginning to reach out to, in that case, before Sandy and I started working together, to the entities that existed, their record companies, folk record companies mostly, they were really not sure about this whole singer-songwriter thing and whether that was going to fly or not. So they were like, well, we kind of have our niche and we're gonna stick with it, and you don't quite fit it, so good luck. and then of course the singer-songwriter world sort of exploded, and eventually so did the whole record company business that ever serviced folks like us. You still have your top 1, 2, maybe 3 companies out there that support the top artists, pop, rock, hip hop, those folks. But it started to go back to the hands of the musicians, and we all started doing our own thing. And now there's much more focus on the music, and who knows about the business part of it. We all struggle with the business part of it, or some of us do. Some of us are great at it, and we're somewhere in the middle of that. And for us, the merch thing, when I first started out, merch was strictly recordings. And actually, when I was just beginning, it was LPs, and then it was LPs and cassettes, and then it was LPs, cassettes, and CDs. And the question when I first put out my first recording, would we do it in 3 formats? And I just thought, wow, how am I going to carry around all these things as a solo artist and get them from place to place and whatnot? And we went with cassettes and CDs, and probably by the end of the first or second year, cassettes were almost out. So, the whole merch idea, and then the merch thing sort of expanded for us.
Yeah, I'm realizing, let me just sort of on the tech side, let me spotlight us and David, so that for the recording, and then also for folks who wanted to have us spotlighted so you can see us a little bit bigger.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
You know what you're doing. I'm so new at Zoom. I'm so clueless at Zoom.
Pandemic land. And I also want to say, I was curious, I think we have some people in the room we know who are performing, activist songwriters like we are, and we probably have some folks in the room who are interested in doing that, and we know that we have some folks who are also our listeners and folks who love the music, and we couldn't do it without you all. And we want to make sure that we kind of touch on things that answer to what you're thinking about in this question of, right, like even a question, right? I'm from Cleo already. I'm wondering about the similarity between the dance world and the music world in terms of survival. Maybe there are similar techniques. That's a good question. I totally can't answer to that. But maybe there's something that you could be telling us when we do a little bit of question and answer at the end, Cleo, because I know you're a performing dancer. So we'd love to hear from that. That's wonderful. I think sort of overview wise, I think I wanted to just say that as activist musicians, where we are starting is that we are starting without pretty much the ground that's under our feet is the grassroots community. We and that's grassroots activists, that's grassroots music lovers in the folk world, that is grassroots
in the peace
radio,
and justice world, which is much more our world.
Yeah, that's what I said about activists.
Yeah.
Grassroots radio, maybe there's grassroots TV and and that kind of thing. But everything for us is not the world that is seen as an industry or as supporting a business. And what ends up happening is that we have to sort of create this job. And I often would say that if you're going to do this as for a living, you have to have you have to be comfortable with risk. And we know why we do this, right? We all are here because we love justice music, and we love to work for justice. And what else would we be doing with our energy in the world but putting all of our energy and our creativity to create a world that we want to live in? And that's where it starts, at least for me. And then the other stuff is you kind of have to make it happen. And it's pretty much akin to what happens in activism. You see something that you want to be different and you make it happen. And on the music side, I've often joked that there is not an activist Hot 100 Billboard list. And I really wish that there were. And all the time I was thinking, well, why isn't there? And I just suddenly realized at the beginning of this workshop that like, oh, maybe I have to do something about that. Like maybe this is the time now, because the rest of the world, or at least the rest of our country, has a better sense of the fact that we need to take action after this whole summer of activism, after the killing of George Floyd, and after the pandemic, and everybody suddenly being able to focus a little bit more on it because things were so dire under Trump, and with the pandemic, we could focus. So I feel like maybe actually Billboard World would listen to a moment like that. I still think they wouldn't see people like David and us, because there are bigger name people who put out, like one political song in that year, and they will get it, right? Because they have the access already. But that's sort of the world that we're living in, is kind of how to balance an independent world that we've created, and maybe we can push into the other world of music that exists.
And there are also often people that take fewer risks with regard to the subjects that they take up in their, the content of their songs, and we address a wide range of things, which makes us risky to the larger commercial music scene. But one of the other reasons why we don't have a top 100 or whatever is that we try the best that we can to minimize our competition, our competitiveness throughout within the community. We try to sort of look at those things and look at the hierarchy and all of that. So it makes it a little bit more challenging to function with this overarching system that is very hierarchical, that's very competitive, competition oriented, and also separating musicians as being these mysterious creative beings that are so different from everybody else. And we come from the Pete Seeger school of music that says, no, actually everybody can do this, and in fact not only can everybody do this, but it's essential for everybody to do this. And yeah, there will be people that are more skilled. There are people that have more time, more privilege, frankly, to use their time in this way rather than feeding their families or whatever. There are other people that have survival more in mind, and we're like in the middle again. They're trying to survive and doing this sort of thing. It's a tricky thing. There are an awful lot of musicians out there that are very successful musicians that are still only being able to really make it and be the successful musicians that they are because they have a side job, or because they have a trust fund, frankly, or they have a partner who has money. I'm often really discouraged and a little frustrated to hear, God, you too, I mean, you have to do that. I mean, we don't have that option, so we're always kind of skating and hopefully getting by, but it's tricky. I mean, the onset of things like Patreon and whatnot have
Yeah.
made that easier
Let's pass that on
for
to
us.
David, and then we can come back to the Patreon thing too.
Yeah. I mean, so like, I mean, of course, whether you're doing music for trying to be part of a social movement, or just traveling and playing music totally unrelated to a social movement, or even if you're a rock star, there's still you've still been impacted by the 80% of the music industry that collapsed over the past 20 years. So, and everybody, at every level, so all those record labels that Pat's been talking about, they don't exist anymore, right?
Right.
And like Flying Fish and Rounder and all these different labels that used to be the labels that all the singer-songwriters wanted to get on, because they might actually promote your work and all that a little bit. I mean, of course, in the end, whether for a lot of the promotion didn't really happen, and it was a lot of there was a lot of money. I mean, relatively speaking, involved for even for for a musician that's traveling around and doing 100 gigs a year and selling a few thousand CDs, which is basically my situation for a long time, and I'm sure that was a very similar situation with them as Revolution, and with a lot of other independent musicians out there, whether political or not. And that and of course we're all traveling in different networks depending on whether we're maybe politically oriented. I mean, of course, with Pat and Sandy and me, I'd say the vast majority of our gigs are being, when we're doing gigs, they're being booked by more activist oriented types, or if it's a more mainstream kind of gig, it's still the activist end of that. Like if it's a church gig, it's a Unitarian church. It's that kind of thing.
Yes.
So, but still, it's like the network of traveling and performing, and the phenomenon of basically, lining up gigs to do that will hopefully pay something, because you got bills to pay. And but yeah, it's a self-employed, you're running a business essentially, is what you're doing. Not essentially, that's what you're doing. And I think in the music scene, because there's this sort of mystique around the idea of being a musician, and like that is largely created by the music industry. This idea that there's something special about musicians, and they can write great songs, and the reality is, for any of us who have been told we're good songwriters, is that we've been working at it for a long time, and that's probably why we got good at it. And it wasn't something that we just started out being good at. And yeah, then there's aspects of that, who has the time to be working on that? That's another question, important question. But the with this mystique, it creates this problem for a lot of musicians at every level of the music industry, because we often get this idea that because we're musicians, somebody else should do everything else for us, or somehow because we're good songwriters and good performers, that should be enough, and then that somehow that should be we should be able to survive at that. But that's just not how it works, and that's never really been how it works, and that's not how it works for the pop stars either. The pop stars, to the very slight extent I have any familiarity with that world, they have to get up at 7 in the morning or 6 in the morning or 5 in the morning or whatever, and practice and go to catch a flight and do an interview, and they're on the clock. They're every 15 minutes they're looking at their, they're going crazy with that stuff. It drives people nuts. They're working their asses off. They're scheduled. They're totally scheduled. Oh, those of us who are not working with the managers and booking agents and record companies, which is the vast majority of musicians, whether they're surviving or not, at it. We have to do all that stuff for us, ourselves. We are running a business. All of us, in order to survive at this, have to be running a business. And that's true whether we're in the activist circles or not. We all have to pay rent. We all have to eat. We all have to pay for the rental cars and all that stuff. People who haven't got that figured out, or who just can't deal with the money end of it, or who don't want to, or any number of other reasons, but all legitimate, then it doesn't work. You have to run a business, and then if you face that reality, then you got to figure out, well, how does that work? And there's a lot of different aspects to it, to surviving, and performing, to booking tours. But also, if you're not doing any of that stuff, which is, I think, also a relevant thing for folks, anybody out there who's involved with making music in any capacity, even if you're not touring and even if you're not doing any of that professional stuff, you can still be writing songs, recording songs, and sharing them online in the real world in all kinds of different ways, and in getting it out there, and being part of the conversation, and also making a little money from it potentially. And that's all stuff that everybody can potentially do, regardless of whether they're professional or touring musicians. But yeah, to really I mean, there's a wonderful book came out about a year, no, yeah, around a year ago, called "The Death of the Artist" by a local Portland author named Bill Derisiewicz, and he goes through he goes through like the 13 major categories of the arts as he has it categorized, and basically how all of these industries have been destroyed by big tech over the past 20 years, except nominally for television, where there's so much content being created that there's a lot of employment, but people are working at at an average of 50% of the wages that they were getting 20 years ago in television. And that's because of the death of the arts generally, that they can exploit people in the TV industry so much because all the other artists are unemployed. So, where else are they going to go but Los Angeles, basically, if they're trying to get that kind of work, like, for a boss, kind of like, not being because that kind of work exists for artists, and for a lot of us it's kind of like almost it's another planet, because many of us probably don't even know people who do that kind of salaried work as artists, because that's not most of us. But
I've always been curious, David. One of the things that I and we have never gotten as much of a grip on is the things that you do that are different than what we do. You travel internationally a fair amount, and you have a fair following internationally, and you also have a lot of success at getting attention on social media and on a variety of different platforms. Like, we primarily have access to our audience through, and especially during the pandemic, through Facebook. We have a tiny bit of access through YouTube, but those have been our primary source of audience, and especially new audience over this time. And to varying degrees depending on what we're putting out, whether it's a video or just an audio thing or something, or a workshop kind of thing. We get a reasonable sized audience, much larger actually than we could physically as a general rule. But I'm curious about, like, what do you use to reach out to? I know that when you broadcast your interviews and things like that, you do those on a variety of different platforms, and I'm always curious about how you do that.
Yeah, those are good ones. And the Facebook thing, though, that's like, I mean, when Facebook is the dominant, platform, and especially for people who are like over 30, I guess these days, right, is the way it is. And it's and like, I think you guys and many other artists, like Attila the Stockbroker in England is another great example of artists who are using Facebook really well and getting a lot of engagement. And that's something to be like to look at from the sort of, the sort of business point of view. It's like you look at these social media platforms, and you see what, if you're trying to, you put on your sort of social media consultant hat, if you were to be a social media consultant, not that any of us are necessarily qualified, but like then you're thinking, so you look at the different social media sort of activity of a person or an organization, and you can see that it's working on some platform and it's not working on another. They're getting a lot of engagement on one platform and not a lot of engagement on another, and there's a lot of different reasons why that happens. And I don't have it all figured out, but definitely, like, I think, like, one reason why I think you guys are great people to be doing this workshop is because you look at what you're doing on Facebook. You're getting a lot of audience for your regular performances there. You got a lot of followers on Facebook. And this is, I believe, in no sort of, in a fairly direct way, related to the fact that you have, I think now, I don't know, over 200 supporters on Patreon. I haven't looked lately. I don't know. But you got a lot of supporters on Patreon, which is the main crowdfunding platform for artists trying to survive as artists these days, which is important to distinguish between Patreon and other crowdfunding platforms like Kickstarter, because this is a platform for crowdfunding your entire existence rather than just crowdfunding for a particular project. And the whole crowdfunding phenomenon sort of largely began with crowdfunding particular projects. And I think for a lot of us artists, and for generally as the artists in general, I think my own individual experience, and I think many people's collective experiences were the same. But basically, we started out crowdfunding for projects because we weren't making any money from merch sales anymore. But we figured, okay, well, at least we can crowdfund for this stuff. And then we kind of slowly realized, oh, wait a sec, not only are we not making money to make recordings, but we're not making money from selling the recordings to do things like pay the rent and stuff like that. So then we started crowdfunding for our entire survival with things like Patreon, which came into existence because it was needed. It came into existence when it did because it was needed, and that's why it's so popular. Because it's a well-run platform that came into existence at the time that it was desperately needed by huge numbers of artists who are in the process of losing their sources of income and their livelihoods, across the world. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's been around for a while, and we only just signed on before the pandemic.
Yeah.
But I'm still curious about, like, how did you start to build an international audience? And also, do you have a lot of followers on Instagram or on, do you have people that watch a lot on Twitch and things like that we haven't used yet? Like, do you use TikTok?
Right. So I have very little. I have had virtually no success with Twitch, TikTok, or a lot of other platforms. But where I'm doing well is on Spotify and the other music streaming platforms. And that I would say for so many of these things, it's about getting into it early. I mean, that's one of of course, having good content is obviously necessary, but then when you get into something at the beginning, whether on purpose or by accident, which in my case was totally by accident, basically, then, because for those, basically before all the music streaming platforms existed, many of us, and I'm sure you guys as well, were using CD Baby, right? Were you using
Right.
cdbaby.net? And
Yeah.
now there's other platforms, but that was like the only one for a long time, or it seemed to be, where you could just you could not only sell your albums online, but they would get all your music onto all the different music streaming platforms that
Right.
came into existence. So at first it was just iTunes, and where people were downloading music and paying for it. And then what happened was basically, in 2013, well, before 2013, there were all these music streaming platforms different from download platforms, right? Where people could just listen to stuff for free without paying 99 cents to download, but they would still have to pay maybe $10 a month to be members, or they would illegally download stuff through Napster or through other platforms. And I made the troublesome, perhaps, very, very fraught decision a long time ago to put up all my music on the internet for free when it became evident that that was where things were going. And I think that resisting that tendency in many ways would have been a better way to go, but not resisting it the way the record industry was doing it by suing people who were downloading music, thousands of people. I mean, it was the way they were doing it wasn't the way to go, and I think that there still is way better ways to go in terms of musicians making some, or content creators basically generally making money from big tech, who are taking all the money that should be going to so many content creators, but because they totally dominate everything, they make the trillions, and most other people make pennies. And it's very strategic, and it's been very systematic. But when I started giving away my music, I kind of like short circuited some of this stuff in a way. And basically, when the free streaming platforms came along, my music was already out there, and so it was like easy for it to kind of get adapted by the people who are already listening to all the music for free in the first place. And I don't know exactly what all the reasons why it happens that some people end up getting a bigger following on the streaming platforms than others. But I think getting in there early and putting all my stuff up there and not making any bones about trying to make any money off of this when I realized it wasn't going to happen anyway. So I made the transition early to the National Public Radio / Pacifica model of survival, which is basically, I gave up on the idea of selling merch long before I stopped selling merch. And because I could see that that was going to be the way it was going. And I just started trying to crowdfund in different ways from the people who liked my music. So it's the model of Pacifica started it, and NPR emulated it. But the Pacifica model, which is much more popular around the world. I don't know if they started it or whoever started, but they are the ones that kind of like in the United States made it a well-known phenomenon. And the idea is you give away free content in the form of radio programming, and then you ask people to donate if they appreciate it, and to become sustainers, and to donate on an annual, and PayPal and Patreon and all these platforms that allow you to bill people annually or monthly and that sort of thing have been just tremendously useful, and probably tremendously problematic for a lot of people who end up subscribed to all kinds of stuff they don't even know what they're subscribed to. And but for those of us who are getting your subscriptions that you then forget about, we are doing, it's really good.
Yeah. Let me step back for a second and say a couple things and we see what your questions and comments, so we will address some of those questions. And Fred also was just answering the CSA exclamation point. Right. I'm a monthly contributor to David's CSA. When we first started doing the crowdfunding thing, we used to call it CSC, which was community supported. So CSA stands for community supported agriculture. And we used to call ours CSC, community supported culture, because it is the same idea. And
I call it community supported art in order to keep CSA.
Nice. Just right. There was
rather than community supported music or something.
And I also want to say something about Patreon, which is Patreon is basing itself on the old school medieval and Renaissance era and Baroque era concept, where there were patrons of the arts for artists, musicians. So Bach had patrons of the arts. And that just indicates to me that it's always been challenging to make a living as a musician. Just back in the day, they had this term of patron of the arts. So the fact that Patreon has brought that back is really good. And I do want to talk about Patreon. There's two kind of things I wanted to pop in that are sort of like the basic level, even before we think about all of this online stuff, because sometimes the online stuff is the best way, and sometimes it can be complicated for folks who feel like I'm not having an impact online, and I don't even understand how to start doing that tech. And the first thing, and it was something that you also mentioned, David, you said that you were getting support from people who like your music. That's sort of where it starts, is that you do need to put your music out there, and there will be people who respond to it. Maybe you're going to find them on Facebook. Maybe you're going to find them live because you're playing at your farmer's market every Saturday or something like that. I don't know exactly which way you're going to find your people, but that's a key thing, is that you need to find people who respond to your art. And then what I feel is important for what we have done for these 20 years is we have to remind/teach people about the value of the music that they are then enjoying in their lives or using in their lives. And one of the things about that is, for us, we have some congregations that use our music, and the language that I've used when I send them an email, because they say, we want to use your song in this service, do we have your permission? So then we say, wonderful. So there are a couple things I want to say about it. I always try to be kind of positive if I can. I say, wonderful, we're so glad you want to use the music. Here's how it works for us. And the languaging is something like, we want you to contribute something that's sustainable for you and sustainable for us. So they actually have a sense that we understand that they might not be able to give us as much money as would really help us, but then they get that they need to help sustain us. And I include the line that says that your sustaining us allows us to write the next song that you'd like to use in your congregation. And what's important about that is that people don't get it. They think, oh, you wrote that song. Why am I paying you for that song? You already wrote it. It's done. The work is done. But they need to understand that supporting you as an artist is about supporting you so that you can continue to create your art. So this ties in with the patron of the arts idea, but it also is with a piece of looking at the fact that we have to do teaching and coaching and reminding, and sometimes pulling people back who have already done, use something without permission. There is sometimes, you can't always be friendly about it, but there is also knowing how to ask for help and ask for support is a big part, I think, of this job. And I really had a hard time with that for a long, long time. I didn't want to have to ask anybody for anything, and I felt uncomfortable about it and blah, blah, blah. But you need to get over that as an artist, especially as an independent activist artist. You need to start being able to say what you need. You need to be able to tell people what you need. Here, if you can, when you help me, and there's ways of languaging it. If you say, if you help me, it's different than saying, when you help me, I can do this. If you say, if you help me, it leaves open the, well, if or if not. But when you say when, it asserts the positive. So there's a lot about language. And that's not because I'm trying to convince somebody. It's about because I'm trying to set it up for the most positive outcome. And the truth is, there are a lot of people, and we have some on our workshop here today, who are people who love this music, who know the value of this music in their lives and want to know that we can come back and sing at Redwood Gardens, or know that we can come back to Vancouver and tour there. And people know that all of this costs money, and sometimes we have to let them know the extent of the money that it costs. For us, we started our Patreon. My brother had been telling me about it for years. You should really do this. And I was like, I don't have time to do this, right? Does that sound familiar to people?
You don't have time not to do it.
I don't have time to create an online profile telling people, here's all the cool things we can deliver for you if you support us monthly. And maybe I didn't have time. I really felt like I didn't. But we finally did it in January of 2020. And so we did it before the pandemic, because we were already at a crossroads of, we cannot do this job anymore. Yeah. I was already taking like a job skills class on how to write resumes so that I could get a job, because it's been a roller coaster for 19 years. It's still a roller coaster. But we had it in place. And when the pandemic hit, people really got it because they could see it pandemically, right? You could see that artists were suddenly left without a foundation. And now we're at a different kind of crossroads that we need to communicate to our Patreon people and our general audience who isn't yet our patron that we're at another shift. We started this before the pandemic and we needed it then. We're going to need it. We continue to need that kind of support even as we move out into the concept of performing again. But we're at a transition moment where suddenly everyone's like, oh, are you touring instantly? But if you're touring, it means you're putting money into travel that you don't know if it's going to come through. What if we book a gig and then it's raining because it's Massachusetts, or there's a surge because it happens? I think it's kind of risky, right? And there was one more facet of that that I hope comes back to my mind about it. But just another element of the uncertainty of the moment. It might come back.
I have always had to do the discussion about how we value ourselves as workers, because that's a really important piece of this. If we're not valuing ourselves, then other people don't know how to value us. And, on the thing that Sam said, people are like, yeah, but you already wrote the song, you already did the work. Well, all kinds of people in big tech that are content producers, all kinds of, actors and singers on a certain level, we just take it into account, like, well, of course they'll get royalties, they get residuals on, whenever those things are aired, or whenever those things are marketed in a different market or something like this. But we don't ever apply that to musicians, and that's weird. It's just weird that we don't do that. And music, we know, because people tell us all the time, and we see signs of it everywhere. Music is really essential to people's lives, and we don't want to make it so that it's not accessible. We want it to be accessible to people, and at the same time, we want to be able to survive doing this. Now, the Patreon thing has been great for us, especially through the pandemic, because we didn't have the additional expense of touring. But what we learned by not touring is that touring is massively expensive. And in truth, for us, we have never covered our travel expenses. It is in that way, touring is not sustainable. And we have and are in now massive credit card debt over our touring expenses. We jump-started the Patreon thing really by very honestly, very humbly saying to our audience, okay, in the course of this last week and a half, all of our income and all of our jobs have disappeared. I understand that everybody else shared that experience. We had the benefit of this platform that was already set up for, that we set up. And then we said, okay, here's a way that you can support us. Because right now we have no visible means of support. I mean, we really panicked. And people really, really rose to the occasion, and we're really, really grateful that people did that. We also said, look, we don't really know how to do this online thing at all. We haven't done this before, but we will figure it out. And when we do, you can come once a week and you can learn an Emma's Revolution song, and you can support us either with a one-time contribution or whatever, or you can become one of our Patreon
We always left
supporters.
it open. People did not have to contribute at all.
Exactly. You can come for free, because we also understand that, in fact, that's one of the things that we've always said, prefaced everything else that we do. We understand, even with gigs through this period of time, we understand that some people have been very affected by this and are really in a really difficult position, and other places have not been very affected, and in fact have made a reasonable, comfortable way through this. So don't let the money be the thing that keeps you away from it. Know that you can come here, and if and as you're able, contribute in all these different ways. And we're not very good at saying during the course of these things, hey, you can do this, and reminding people. And that's something that it makes a difference for us to get better at that sort of thing. And just, I don't like the feeling like I'm always the product and I'm always hawking myself as the product, but I do want people to be aware that that really, truly, this is only something that we can do with the support of our community, and as much as we support the as much as we appreciate the applause and the verbal support that we get, and we get a ton of that, it does make, we do have to make some a reasonable kind of income so that we can continue to do this. And we have really been on the precipice in many cases over a pretty long period of time of having to stop doing this. We are not getting younger, and this
We're
business
not.
totally feeds on younger. It's always bringing in younger people and younger people, and it gets more and more challenging. And I'm sure some of the older artists here in the room understand that it gets weirder and much more difficult as we get older, and touring gets harder. And I definitely can't tour even the way we did 10 years ago. It's just tougher on your body to do that. So and I'm always talking to other artists saying, look, if you're willing to do this at a really, really, when we're out all out in the world, and things are more stable. I have had to say earlier on, before the pandemic, to artists, if you do this for just a really small amount of money, you drive wages down for all of us. So please be mindful of that, and think about what is within a range. We have a very open door policy for our events, and it's in general it's a less if you can, more if you, or more if you can, less if you can't kind of thing. But we do say this is what we recommend, and we also leave it up to the promoters of the event, which are, in most cases, are music directors or ministers or whatever, because we do a lot of stuff within the progressive church because they're not afraid of our politics, ironically enough. We say to them, the people in your community that are really struggling, and wave them in the door. That's all at your discretion, and we invite you, we encourage you to do that, because we understand that music is medicine, and but when you can, and if you can, please encourage people to pay what they're able. And we have also heard from people with money, with resources. We want to be able to support you.
That's what
Give
I
us
wanted
the
to say,
opportunity
too.
to do that, and make it easy for us.
Yeah.
Because we have a lot. Actually, a lot of people come to us asking for money. So the ones who invite us, and the ones who are most sort of relational in the way they deal with us, and and make it an easy thing for us, are really the ones that we contribute to first.
Yeah, the people want to support you, and they but you need to give them a framework, and they need to know, first of all, like, I mean, I don't want to just repeat everything you guys just said, but but I'm going to repeat a little of it, because just I think some of it just needs to be emphasized. Like, we're workers, and artists are workers, and they have the same bills like any other worker, and we need to everybody, including artists, need to understand that. But then artists need to understand that about themselves, and then be able to explain that to other people, because other people don't understand that. So, and also, like, the idea that artists are making money from other sources, it also needs to be clarified, because it's not the case generally. And this is also incidentally true for some of the so-called legacy artists, who have hundreds of thousands of monthly listeners on Spotify, millions of streams a month. They're making almost nothing, literally almost nothing. I'm making more money from Spotify than Wayne Kramer is, I believe, and he has 400,000 monthly listeners, and I have 12,000, and that's just because of the record deals that he signed as a young man with these record labels, these big labels that had no interest in, the contracts were set up so that the musicians would never see any money beyond their covering the expenses of their outlandishly expensive recordings and touring lifestyles, which they then later find out, they owe all that, and they're not going to make any money after they pay for it. But I mean, obviously there's other musicians making loads of money, but it's worth pointing out that some of the most famous musicians you've ever heard of are not making much money at all from those deals that they had a long time ago. But obviously there's other ways they can make money, like the same ways we're doing it, by by sort of beseeching their audiences to support them. I mean, it doesn't seem to be necessarily something the rock stars want to do or need to do, but if you're more well known, whether or not you're at that level of fame, you have the more of a capacity to be able to reach, talk to your people who like your music, and talk to them about the necessity of your survival. But I also I wanted to I'm really it's horrible to hear that you guys are actually you've never made more than breaking even on touring. I mean, I've just and I hope this is of interest to other people, not just a conversation here between us, but like 2020 it was amazing to find out just how expensive touring is. I mean, it was just astonishing to find out how much money I was saving by not leaving town, even though I eat out constantly at food carts and I spend money. I smoke a lot of weed. I mean, I'm not careful about money, but but my goodness, it's just amazing, but I'm really bad at doing the books, and all I know, like and I think, but this is relevant to the question of touring internationally. Like all I really used to know in terms of doing the books, when you talk about credit card debt, it was always like I'd do a tour, pay off the credit card debt, and then I'd be zeroed out if I were lucky. And then as I'm living at home, I'd go back into credit card debt from the expenses involved with life and recording, and but usually just mainly just life, like eating and rent and stuff like that. Then I go on tour again and pay off the credit card debt, and of course part of the credit card debt is incurred because I'm buying plane tickets and reserving rental cars and all that stuff. But then but then over time that stopped working, right? And then I realized it was because I wasn't selling enough merch to make the difference, as the income was declining. I was realizing it was largely about merch sales. But what I did 5 years ago was I completely stopped touring the United States. I don't book tours in the United States anymore, pre-pandemic, and I was already only doing like regional ones. But I used to do big driving tours all over the country, and that no longer was possible, for a lot of different reasons, which are all relevant to this to our profession. Probably the chief reason is the collapse in merch sales, but a really big reason was also the collapse in university gigs, and that was not just because I aged. It was because those gigs don't exist to nearly the same extent that they used to, and so then my touring, where I can actually do a little better than break even if I'm lucky, is in Europe. But what I've been realizing in recent tours is that when I tour England, I'm no longer guaranteed to be breaking even. I need to be much more careful about how I'm booking stuff, because the gigs are paying less and less well there for all the same reasons as here.
Mm-hmm.
But in continental Europe, on average, as you'll learn if you read *The Death of the Artist* by Bill Deresiewicz, in continental Europe, they pay their taxes support the arts 100 times as much as in the United States. 100 times. So what happens when you support your arts industry 100 times as much as the United States does? Well, of course, in places like Switzerland and the Netherlands, a ridiculous amount of that money goes into classical arts and doesn't really go into the rest of the arts. But in other places, like in Denmark and Germany, the arts funding goes all over the place, including punk rock clubs. They can, so I can play in a squatted social center that normally employs punk rock bands to perform, and they'll pay me well, and it'll be coming from the government. And by well, I mean like maybe 800 to $1,000 for a gig. And whereas I used to try, and I think it's important to talk about this like really concretely, like for an individual artist traveling around anywhere, you are spending $200 to $250 a day easily just to tour, just to live, just between the gas, the rental car, if you cut the division of how much you're spending on the plane ticket and occasionally staying in Airbnb, whatever, altogether, you can figure you're spending $200, $250 a day as an individual to tour. And then then you got to make money on top of that. So if your gigs aren't paying, at least $500 a night, you're not going to break even. And then if you're not selling merch, you can't. I used to rely on the merch sales to make that 500 basically, and then that stopped happening, right? So then that's why Europe is the only place I can tour now, because even with all the patronage, that doesn't come close to covering the cost of touring. Touring is way too expensive. I can stay home and maybe survive on patronage, but if I'm going to tour, the gigs have to pay. And in Europe, it's funding. The not only do more people have disposable income and less time working and more time to go out, but the venues are often subsidized, the performers are subsidized. So you're playing in a venue that itself is paying nothing to exist. And then they are getting money from the government to pay their artists. And sometimes they're even getting money from the government to pay their staff, which is really strange to walk into a squatted punk social center and to know that these people serving you beer are actually getting paid to do so. It's almost a little weird. I mean, it's a little wrong. It's like, would you be here otherwise? And I'm not even sure what this place is doing here. Why? What's squatted about it? What was ever squatted about this place? I don't know. But anyway, it's Europe. It's a different reality. But it's that's how. But when I started touring in Europe, it was also another sort of strategic, and I mean, it's not necessarily anything that most people necessarily can take advantage of. But if at any point you, as a musician, have a following online, especially because of some particular song or some album or anything, that is the time to capitalize on it. I hate to use the term, but that is the time. And if you don't do it then, you've missed your opportunity. And I didn't know that. And I wasn't smart about it. I had a girlfriend in Hamburg. And that's the only reason that I basically started touring in Europe. And that's, I followed her home, with her, she encouraged me to, but from Colorado. And that happened to be at the peak of the global justice movement when I was playing at protests and doing gigs all over the country in the context of the global justice movement. I had nothing to do with Europe, and I didn't know anything about what was going on there, but I followed her home, started doing some gigs there, and then found out, well, there's the same movement happening all over Europe, of course, and they all speak English. And so then it was easy enough to plug into it since I was already there anyway, and since I it was already happening at the time. And then by the time that movement wasn't happening as much, I had already developed this following in all these European countries, but which never would have happened if I hadn't done it at the right time, which I could have done intentionally, but as it happened, I didn't. It just happened to be perfect timing for me.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I'm thinking about looking and answering some of the specific.
Yeah, and there's some really good questions.
Yeah.
Can we start out? Let's there.
And let me just say what I want to do, if this works for you, David. Is there a couple that are like really specific questions to conversations we've just been having? So maybe if we can answer some of them, and then go to a point where we can take questions from people, because we have some people in the room who have really deep experience. I would want to start at one that's a really quick one for us to answer, if you don't mind, David, from Dell. How do you determine the way to structure payments by a congregation / what do you ask for? This is a good thing to conceive of, because you can be asking for it not just of a congregation, but when someone asks you to come and sing at an event. And I think those events have to sort of include...
Those are different, though. I'll just
They
tell
are
you
different, but
the
what
way
I was going to
did
say
those
is, I think to some extent they sometimes have to include activist events. If it's a demonstration, we don't expect to get paid. We're happy if there is something, which once in a really, really, really blue moon, that does happen. But for us with congregations, we took some time. I mean, you did the research to sort of see what was a scale, but then we asked for a sliding scale donation. And there are a couple issues. Churches want to, there's a concept of using a song that people will pay for a one-time use, but that assumes that you have like a staff who can answer your email, which would be me, like every year that you might want to use it, which I don't have the time for that, right? Remember my famous line, I don't have time for that. I really don't. As an independent musician, we're wearing so many hats. So we offer a license in perpetuity, and we ask people to, which means they pay for it once and they can use it at their church again. And we give them a sliding scale for use of the song. This is not for use of a video of us singing the song, which is different because that's more of like a performance. But we have a sliding scale of $75 to $150, and they can do more and they can do less. And we say our priority is you use the song. But I frame it all in the sustainability language so that they understand that they're not paying for the song that you wrote yesterday. They're paying for the fact that you are an artist who's going to continue to write songs. That was a specific question. There's a specific question from Penny. Some musicians are members of the Musicians Union, which will support members when they need it. What do you think about that approach? We're members of the Musicians Union. That support is it can't support all of us to have a livelihood. It's just not that kind of a fund, at least for musicians in our Musicians Union, which is Local 1000, traveling musicians. We have one of the founding members here in the room. He can speak to that. But I don't think that that's a huge piece. I don't know, David, if you have a different feeling about that, or Pat.
Well, one of the things that, and Charlie, you may want to actually speak to this because, being one of the founding members, the trajectory, how the Musicians Union Local 1000 has changed over time, and whatnot, and what it offers now is certainly different than what it offered and what it was intended to offer, and what it did offer at the beginning. And all of us are sort of dealing with that in different ways that are, those of us who are members. One of the things that the Musician Union was helpful for is that it created a base, a minimum wage, which there wasn't even any standard for us traveling musicians. And also an awareness that we're not being paid by one employer all the time. We're actually being paid by different employers in different places all the time. So the other thing that was also a good thing that the Musicians Union made available to us that was not very available was insurance for our equipment, our instruments, our computers, all of that stuff can be covered for a relatively affordable rate when we didn't have access to that before. And they can buy, because they're representing lots of people, insurance at a much better rate than each individual musician can. So that has been a big help. I could never quite, we pay our annual dues, but I never could quite figure out exactly how the rest of the thing worked and how we paid in and what the standards were around that.
And it's hard to know if it's worth it now, and et cetera. It's complicated.
We've been advised in different ways from, by different people. So Charlie, I don't know if you want to speak to this or not. We can bring you in and spotlight you in here too.
Let's see. Would you like to, Charlie?
Sure, I don't mind. It's what's been on my mind while I've been listening to you. And one of the important things that David said that I want to take and keep is that it's important to get in early on these different income streams. And I have been on the trailing end of just about everyone I can think of, and I can
except for Local 1000.
What David says is true. And the only thing that I've done early and on time, and it's been the most important part of my making a livelihood out of being a musician, is to organize and become an active member in Local 1000 of the American Federation of Musicians. And Pat, you pointed out part of it. It sets a basic floor. You cannot pay us less than this. You can pay us more and you can negotiate more, but you cannot pay us less than this. It also immediately established the idea that yes, I'm your friend, but you are my employer when I am working for you, and you have to sign a contract that says you are an employer. And part of that is that you will make, not only will you pay me a fair wage, but you'll also make a contribution to the Musicians Pension Union, Musicians Union pension, rather. And so now I'm in the privileged position of not having to worry about paying my bills because with the pension plan, my retirement income is sufficient to cover that basic expense. My worry is how to keep the IRS from not deciding that my livelihood is a hobby, because I have to figure out how, as a musician, to get back into the black after the pandemic. I think also, Dorothy Day said years ago, the greatest hedge against inflation is poverty. And that can be twisted in a lot of ways. But I think because from very early on, I've been trying to minimize my expenses in order to minimize the income I've had to bring in, that's served me very well. I also have to acknowledge that I've always been one half of a two-income household, and that has been, I wouldn't have been able to do it otherwise, and that needs to be acknowledged. But the wisdom of, I mean, in order to have been in the pension plan, I had to figure out how to file those contracts. And that took minutes, literally minutes of my life to figure out how to file a contract. And once I've done that, it's automatic and very simple. And part of the contract is you become invested in the pension plan eventually after a few years. And the payback on the pension plan has decreased, but it certainly has not disappeared. It's income that comes into your account tax-free, and it's paid in perpetuity. I cannot outlive my pension plan. And a lot of people, that's what pension plans used to be, and the Musicians Union pension plan is kind of a fossil in that field. So, I would recommend the Musicians Union to anyone. I would recommend the pension plan to anyone. I would recommend living long and cashing in early when it comes to retirement. And I have to say, the idea of not paying off my credit cards every month was mind-boggling to me. I would be definitely dead. I would have drowned now if I had built up credit card debt. And I mean, I don't, I'm aware of the privilege that I'm speaking out of, but I haven't had a high income, and I haven't inherited any money or anything like that. It's just Dorothy Day keeps whispering in my ear, cut down on your expenses. So I don't know if that was helpful.
Yeah,
No,
absolutely.
it was.
It's
Thank you.
wonderful.
Yeah.
Thanks, Charlie.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I want to say in response that we are two people on one income, and I think that is part of why.
Yeah.
And we're two women on one women's gendered income, right? 77% or 77 cents for a dollar. And and our thing was always like, we didn't want to say no to all of the amazing things we wanted to do and the things that we thought were important, and we were willing to live on that roller coaster. But it's not admirable. I wouldn't recommend it.
Yeah. And the
I
wage
think-
gap makes a difference.
Yeah.
I think your biggest problem is that you were never paid what you were worth.
Thank you.
That's lovely to hear,
very sweet.
Charlie.
Now you're gonna make us cry, Charlie.
Somebody was mentioning
I
the
thought you were just wiping your mouth.
Michael and Nell there was mentioning the Union of Musicians and Allied Artists, UMAW, and that's worth mentioning. This is an initiative that's been going on, I don't know how long, couple years now. Just between me and everybody in this workshop, my impression is that there's a lot of issues with in terms of how well things are being coordinated, because just based on the fact that I have never yet gotten a single response to any efforts to communicate with the organizers of this union by email or on Twitter or on Facebook, just it's total silence. So whoever's organizing this, they are obviously seriously in need of help, because they should obviously be responding to an email from somebody like me. I think that's fairly evident. But the idea of what they're doing is great, and I was also initiating a similar campaign before they came into existence, because I think that the whole idea around the union is to challenge Spotify and big tech, and because musicians unions generally prior to Local 1000 mostly had been really basically ignoring anybody who wasn't a salaried musician working in Los Angeles or Nashville. or New York. But so for everybody else, when Local 1000 came along and was actually organizing gig workers, who were actually doing gigs for a living, that was a wonderful breath of fresh air. And but then when the new big tech reality came along, that it's a whole other ball of wax to deal with, and so some other folks have been coming along to try to sort of rise to the occasion, which I think desperately needs to be risen to. And I think people are probably aware of the basic reality of the situation, but when Spotify started their free tier in 2013, sort of without asking anybody, sort of giving away all of the world's music for free for everybody to listen at the cost of one 30-second advertisement every 30 minutes, basically, is essentially advertising free, just giving away everything. They did it. They did that in without consulting anybody, and the result has been absolutely disastrous for so many musicians around the world. It really made a huge difference compared to when people had to pay $10 a month to be part of this thing. It's not like our income got any worse or better as a result. It's just through Spotify. It's just that Spotify's number of users increased so dramatically that, basically, so now, 70% of music in the world is gotten through streaming, 50% of the streaming, or maybe it's the other way around. Anyway, most of it is through streaming, and most of that is Spotify. So taking on Spotify is like the obvious thing to do. They are setting the standard. They are the Uber of the music industry. They have destroyed the music industry systematically, globally, and they need to be taken on globally. And that's what UMAW is about. And it's a wonderful initiative, and it needs to grow, and it needs to be better organized. And and this is not to criticize the organizers. I'm not at all, but it's just it needs to get bigger. And but there's offices of Spotify around the world, and if we were able to take them on physically and online and in different forms through a campaign of civil disobedience, global campaign of civil disobedience, shutting down their offices, I think, which would be the way to go, simultaneously surrounding their buildings in Stockholm, New York, San Francisco, Berlin, and all the major capitals, Rio. And, that's what needs to happen, and that could get their attention. But I think, the UMAW's efforts have gotten attention, some attention. It could be getting a lot more attention, and it could be a lot bigger. I'm just saying it's a great idea, and it needs to. It is the thing to do as far as taking on the biggest problem that musicians or any content creator today faces, which is big tech.
Yeah. I think it's also important to flip the script on that. There are a lot of young users of Spotify that think it's really cool to stream music because they're like, they're somehow beating the system. And what I just remind them is that they're beating us. What they're really doing is they're not beating any big system. The system is still thriving with all the ads that they can slap on and all of that. They make massive amounts of money. Who they're killing and who they're undercutting are the independent musicians, and frankly, I don't use them for that reason, and I encourage people not to use them for that reason. They for me, they're sort of the new Napster, and I would rather offer our stuff. You can download our stuff for free from our website. You can also
not everything is free.
Well, you can listen. I should say you can listen to everything for free on our website, and then you can download it for some small amount, and that is the one place where all of our stuff is available. And the truth is about our demographic also does still, to some extent, buy CDs. It's it decreases every year, and more folks are getting more up with the technology and whatnot. But I think one of the things we can do is also say this is what Spotify is really doing and educate people about that.
Yeah, and I want to say that we see your hands raised. Here's a question
Yes,
before, because I've also been keeping some notes of folks that brought things up earlier on. So Michael and Nell, because y'all are the ones who brought up the UMAW, is that what you want to ask a question about? If so, we would come.
I just want to talk about it a little more because I've been in touch with them, and I'm really
Okay.
sorry that they're not paying attention to you. They obviously need to be paying attention.
Let's bring you up. Hold on. Here
Let
we
us
go.
spotlight you.
Here you are.
There.
Okay. All right. So I was just on a call. You guys will be interested in this. Is probably private information. I was just on a call with them yesterday. They are talking to possibly becoming an affiliate of the IWW, the International Workers of the World. And one reason why they are looking at this is because they are building that kind of a union, like the Wadleys, which was an industry-wide union. You know, the traditional unions were the electricians, plumbers, you know, everybody segregated. What I really like about their concept is that you bring in the roadies, you bring in the people that work in the clubs, you bring in the bookers, you bring in the musicians, you bring everybody into one big union. And so I don't know where all this is going. And David, you should try to get in touch with them again, because what I did was get on their list, and I get lists of meetings all the time. I can't keep up with it. They're meeting this subcommittee, this. I mean, and they're very tech. They're younger, and they're into all this stuff, which is, you know, over my pay grade, a lot of it. But they're meeting all the time. Like, what's their organizational structure going to be? Oh, and they put out some really great stuff about how do you organize your meetings so everyone gets a voice. You know, they're really studying the literature of organizing and putting this into, and they've got an initiative where they're raising money for instruments to give to the people in prison. You know, they came out with an anti-funding the police platform. I mean, they're taking very radical ideas, and so. You know, I'm too busy to really get too involved with them, just trying to sustain our so-called business over here with us. But anyway, I encourage anybody to really go and check out what they're doing, and they're really on a roll right now. And this could be a new model for the music industry. And they have today, unfortunately, they had their Spotify campaign meeting, and I hope they're going to put it up on. I asked them if they was going to record it, because I had to miss it because of this today. But they had a big meeting today about their campaign for Spotify, against Spotify. So anyway, that's all I got.
Cool.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to, speaking of, like Nell was saying about bringing all sorts of people in who are in the industry, the roadies and the this and that, I wanted to head back to Cleo, who was mentioning about dancers. Cleo, would you like to speak about kind of if there are artists, similar issues in the arts industry as a dancer?
Yeah, I mean, I've kind of there have been times when I've actually made money dancing, which is really unusual. I mean, but I was, as we were talking, I was trying to think of what I did to get into those kinds of positions. I mean, they never lasted. You know, like I'd get a 4-month contract, let's say, with an entertainment organization, but and then it would be like enough to actually pay rent and buy food, which was pretty amazing. But as soon as I was doing my own work, like something I actually wanted to do, I created on my own, suddenly there was no pay. So that's just something I've noticed, that it always seems like you have to work for someone else, and that it's their message and their motives and the way they want to package you and what they need you for, and then they might pay you. But aside from that, I had this other idea, because I've noticed there's some really unique artists, dance kind of performance artists out there who are actually able to market themselves and make a living, and they're completely unusual and different, and that might actually be a way to go. And I mean, I'd have to investigate more about how they're doing this. Like, there's Eileen Kramer. I mean, she's 100 something years old. She's really old, and she's kind of made. She's internationally famous now for being so old and sounds so funny, and still dancing and creating. That's kind of a funny reason, but it's almost like you to make yourself so stand out for being so individual and so unusual that will get everybody's attention and somehow attract sponsors and people who are interested in what you do. So I don't know if my ideas are interesting, but I was
Yeah, I
thinking.
think that's similar in music. You do have to make what you do unique
Yes.
and interesting and fascinating, like to people who want to come to the audience, but hopefully to media, because media is a huge thing. I want to, I'd love to know how she's lived to 106. I think you put in there in Australia, and it also speaks to what David was saying about how different countries support the arts. We always think of our Canadian friends who, there are like grants you can get. What, like, or a friend in Scotland, they have they fund their artists. You could be the national songwriter of Scotland or something like that. Like, we don't have that here in the good old fight it out US of A. So yeah, I think those points are very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, and like, sorry, go ahead.
We used to have it. There
Right.
was this Artist and Works program like around this.
That's right.
Yes.
And
That's right.
Yeah, so we could have that again, and it's like maybe it's like a demand. It's something that we have to fight for because that art is valuable, and
I think for us, it's again comes down to content. I think that folks who have gotten those grants even relatively recently, State Department kinds of things, are not doing things that are politically challenging.
Yeah, that's a question.
So that's I think that's been an issue for us in a lot of different even for commercial gigs in general. There'll be 8 Democrats on the or at least relatively liberal beings on a board and one conservative, and they're one conservative with a big voice, and that's the one person that whose vote carries the the day, and then we don't get hired.
I want to quote Holly Near before we hand it back to David
Yeah,
to see what he would like. Thank you so much, Cleo. Thanks so
Thank
much.
you. Appreciate that.
In that moment, I want to remember this wonderful comment that Holly made when we were at a Folk Alliance event, and she and Pat were on a panel. It was a long time ago with a number of other people, and somebody said, well, I don't want to sing the one song that I don't want to sing this song because it's political and it might upset somebody in the room.
Might offend somebody.
And she said, who are you offending by not singing the song? So sort of flipping that is important. I want to pass it back to you, David, if there are questions you wanted to answer, or we can go to raised hands.
Yeah, because there's some more here for sure.
Yeah, I want to get to those raised hands, but I think in terms of the Cleo's talking about the making any kind of income from dance and other forms of art, I think it's worth pointing out, and the phenomenon in terms of how this sort of just very logistically, systematically, how this idea works of creating content that you put online that you then sort of get it out there and then try to get people to support you in different ways because of this. Basically it's a multifaceted marketing effort in every step of the way, and it works with any kind of content is important to point out that it's, I mean, there are ways that musicians have advantages because we can tour and perform. So there's, and as Joni Mitchell said, nobody asks Van Gogh to draw Starry, Starry Night again or whatever. He doesn't have to draw it again, but he can't like, I mean, I guess performance painting might be a thing, but, performance, musicians have that advantage as far as touring, but any kind of person who's creating any kind of content, whether you're writing an article or a short story or making a painting or doing a dance that you can film or any number of, creating any kind of content that can be shared online in any form, high quality as possible, whatever form you're sharing it. That's very important with any kind of, if you're writing something, don't share something with grammatical mistakes. Make sure that you've fixed all that and make sure there's space between the paragraphs. Make it look really nice. If you're recording a song, make sure that, do it in nice conditions. It doesn't have to be a recording studio, but something like where all the lyrics can be easily heard and the guitar part or whatever is easily heard and it sounds good and it doesn't sound bad. And, I mean, it doesn't need to sound great, but it needs to sound good. And there's a lot of different aspects to creating content in a way that can be done quickly for free on your other than paying the rent and stuff and buying the microphone. But basically, cheap, free, you just have to put in the time. You create the content, whether you're doing the dance or writing a song or an article or whatever. And when you share it on Patreon, if you're, say, sharing it on Patreon, which I highly recommend, but you can share it there and various other platforms, or from some platform like Patreon, from there onto other platforms. So it's like a link that people can just click play and it's right there and it's free, but they're doing it through Patreon. And so logistically, what that means is basically it's just as easy for them to play the song in, with one click, the way you're sharing it, but you're sharing it so that there's a box and it says Patreon, basically. So if they click that, then they get the chance to see, this is how I can support this artist, if I wanted to do that. So with every piece of content you're sharing, even if you're sharing it on YouTube, not through Patreon, you can have something on the bottom of the screen that says your Patreon link. So there's all kinds of ways to, ideally subtly, ideally not to, sometimes like at a show, obviously you need to make announcements, stuff like that. But, having the link on the bottom, that is actually not subtle. That's actually very out there. And you really don't need to talk about it much. If you got that link there, people know what Patreon is. So that's nice because everybody now knows what it is, pretty much. It's as known as YouTube at this point, pretty much. So people know what it is. You don't need to tell people what crowdfunding is. So that's great. That's really helpful. Now people know what because it used to be, 5 years ago, any of us doing any kind of crowdfunding, we had to explain what it was first, basically, unless they're really, you can use the NPR thing and if they listen to that, whatever. But it's, now it's something everybody's doing. So. But that's I guess that's I could go on all these specific aspects of how to create content that is going to be more attractive to share and how to share it and the logistics involved, and that is important stuff, and we can get really bogged into the weeds of that, and that's worth doing, like if people want to go there, But let's maybe talk about the other questions, and if we want to get into some of that really weedy stuff maybe later.
Okay. And I know, and we have two people with hands raised. We're going to come right to you. There were some questions that I saw earlier on. Shar had a question about, I think it was about licensing.
Right.
Let me see if maybe y'all remember it and could answer to it, or I'll try.
About music licensing. I mean, I've never had any luck.
Yeah. Have you found any income streams from licensing your songs?
No.
I mean,
but it's a thing that people do. I mean, do you have experience, David?
I mean, the only experience I have is with sort of more or less successfully getting stuff out on music streaming platforms and getting some income as a result, some royalties and other forms of income as a result of that. But in terms of the licensing thing, I almost had an experience. I had an experience with that gave me an idea of this whole thing that exists out there, and I've been on this list, and all I know is that it's nothing I would want to try to pursue, and and just in a 1-minute version of why, in case anybody else wants to think about it, is I wrote a song called The Bicycle Song like 30 years ago or something, and it's just a really like the most apolitical song I've ever written, just about how much I like to ride a bicycle.
Right, I like it.
And so this song was, some European tour company that does bicycle tours wanted to have was doing an advertising campaign, and they were looking for a song about bicycle riding, so they went to this advertising music company that licenses songs and stuff like that, and they suggested my song as an example of the kind of song they're looking for. So then they ended up using a different song, but this company then contacted me and said they used your song as an example of the song they're looking for. If they wanted to use it, would you? And so I said, well, what's the deal? So they said, yeah, 10,000 euros for 1 year of licensing for them to use that song. Wow, that's to promote bicycle riding. So yeah, I was all for that, but they ended up not using it. But that's the kind of money that is involved with these licensing deals, and that's like a relatively small scale one. In television, there's bigger money, but that's the kind of money. It's kind of, I mean, it's very common, that kind of 10,000, 5,000. I've never gotten it, but I'm on this list, and what's interesting about the list is literally 95% of the time they are looking for an upbeat song about a relationship. And they put it right out there. They're looking for upbeat pop song about relationships, something aspect about relationships. So I don't have content that they'll be
And
interested
you have to feel comfortable with the group that might use your song. So I think promoting bike riding makes sense. And we had somebody who wanted to use one of your songs for a political campaign, and they were on the wrong side, like, right?
Yeah, so I didn't
it's
let
weird.
her use it, and we also we got after the NPR story about swimming to the other side. I got a call. This woman from Nashville reached out, and she said, I'd like to record your song, but I want to make it into a love song. I said no. And we've also had some offers. This is kind of along those lines, but where people wanted control over our publishing. Like we won the John Lennon songwriting contest one year, and they offer you all these things that sound really great. I mean, they offer you a bunch of instruments and music gear and stuff, and that was lovely, and most of which we didn't end up keeping. But then they offered you this recording contract, and when we had our lawyer look at the small print,
our lawyer, who's our friend, so she doesn't ask us to pay her, is what lawyer fee would be, and
right.
Good to point that out, right? Because otherwise people might think, "Oh, you're paying a lawyer? That's why you have no money." Yeah.
Right? Yeah. No, we've gone through different lawyers for different projects, and then landed on this friend who is a music lawyer, and who. Yeah, we don't put her on retainer or anything like that. We traded some of that gear, in fact, that we won.
And toffee. There's always stuff to trade.
They make the best toffee.
And she's also, financially secure. So that, was a deal that we were able to make. We don't often stumble into deals like that. But in fact, in this case, we did. And we are really lucky that we have. And she was able to read this contract for us, and she said, "Do not sign this contract." She said, "You can sign it with this change and see what they say," and they declined, because what it said was that they wanted to own everything we had created thus far and everything that we would create for our lifetime.
What?
Yeah, they wanted the publishing rights to all of it, and I said no.
In exchange for what? Were they offering you $100,000 or something?
No. No, they were offering us a pretty small amount of money, actually. And, mostly they were just, offering us what often comes to us. We're offering you this opportunity. We're like, no. And likewise, we had somebody that was going to market our shirts, that's the other thing that we haven't talked about, the, Peace, Salam, Shalom shirts. We went to other merch that actually ended up supporting us way more than the CDs and things like that, which really pissed me off at first, but whatever, but we got an offer.
Pointing out, you did really well with those T-shirts, right?
We did.
I mean, that worked out. And Colleen Cattell points out John Lennon would be pissed, and he would. Yeah, that's crazy to name the contest after him and then to steal from the artists like that to win. I mean, that's. Yeah.
It's how that business works,
I never
it's just
entered
like
that contest,
but
now
signing a recording contract. You're basically signing away everything. You don't make a profit. Even Ken
Which is
Irwin.
a good thing about the modern independent thing, doing it through CD Baby or DistroKid. Somebody was saying on the comments that CD Baby sucks, and it's now a corporate thing, and the founder of CD Baby, Derek Shivers, recommends using DistroKid.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, look into that, because we get our $26 from CD Baby because of the 1,000 or 2,000 or 10,000 Spotify downloads. Yeah.
Well, that arrangement won't change, but DistroKid just basically is a little cheaper than CD Baby and does the same thing.
But we had somebody that wanted to market our shirt through Whole Foods before Whole Foods got bought out, and but he basically wanted to pay us just almost nothing.
It was like 5 cents.
I think it was 5 cents.
At the time I said to Pat, it's like 5 cents of things that we're never going to have access to that.
Except
so maybe it would have worked. It's
no,
hard to know.
the issue was we had to print the shirts, so we had
I
to
didn't
pay
remember that.
to print the shirts, and then he would he would grace us with 5 cents per shirt that we had paid for. Ourselves. And I was like, no.
It's like T-shirt Spotify.
I'm sorry.
T-shirt Spotify.
Let's go to Hallie, because you put your name in the chat before you raised your hand. Hallie and then Bruce. So let me get you up here, Hallie.
Yeah.
Hi, Hallie.
Hi, everybody.
Hallie Hammer, wonderful songwriter from Berkeley, California.
Thank you. Well, years ago when Freedom Song Network was active, there'd be gigs like Bernie would either send out an email saying these gigs are happening, or I would get a call from Bernie and say, hey, this is happening. You want to go fill in that spot? But I'm just wondering, like, just a couple of weeks ago, I got a call. I'm with the California Association of Retired Americans, and I always perform for them. But I'm having a hip replacement on Monday. And when they called me up to ask me if I could do this gig in Sacramento live that they're finally getting out, I said, I can't do it. But Jody, who's in charge of it, said, well, do you know anybody else who could? So I went, who could do it? I emailed a couple of people, and Aileen Vance emailed me back, and she said, well, Sandy and Pat are going to be up in Winters right then, and maybe they can do it. So they hooked up with Jody about that gig. And I'm just wondering if there's anything available that I don't know about, or something that could be set up, maybe even on a People's Music Network site, that would be like an e-tree for gigs, possibly by region, so people would be able to look and say, well, I'm going to be here. Well, maybe there's something up there besides what I'm doing, and spread it out a little bit. Or people could say, I can't make this gig, but maybe somebody else can take it. Just a thought to put out there. It might really be helpful for people to have that kind of network.
Yeah, like a ride board, except a gig board.
That's nice.
I mean, we have Holly will flip gigs to us periodically, and Pete used to flip gigs to me, years ago.
Yeah, and I think that we also like the demo thing, because we're in touch with her. We have to get back in touch with Jody, but because it's a demo, we never think of it. It's not exactly like a gig, because a gig.
Except I told them that you needed a stipend.
Oh, you did? Okay, that's good to know. Nobody told us that you told them that. That's really good. See, this is perfect. So okay, thank you. That's really
I said, you're not part of this organization like I am, and you're working musicians. And she said, well, how much? I said, I'm the worst person to ask, but probably ask them what they'd want, but I'd say $100.
Oh, that's good that you said something. That's excellent.
Yeah, so if you offer her 100, she'd probably go for it.
All right. Well, it's a good place to start on the bargaining. However, let me just point out before we go, and thank you for that. One thing I want to say about that gig is that it came to us with language that we right away wanted to speak to about, because for us, when we found actually there's a difference between East Coast demonstrations and West Coast demonstrations. In the East Coast, it was already the practice that music was throughout. Music was throughout a demonstration, so like a speaker and then some music, and a speaker and some music. When we came out here to the West Coast, we found that they were doing things that where the music was like all at the front before the demo started, and we are totally not gonna do that. Like, we don't. And here are the couple of reasons. Like, there was a time we were at Folk Alliance, and John McCutcheon said, nobody ever says to a person who's coming to speak, well, we're going to have you speak before everybody gets there, and then after that, it's going to be singing.
Yeah.
So
No, that's not what they do.
Oh, it's fine.
That's not what they do, though. They have some speakers, and then they have you do something either in the middle or at the end.
Okay, that's not what came through to us. What came through to us is play a couple songs at the top. And so,
really? Okay, I'm not. Yeah.
We come talk to you, and we want to talk about how our music is best used in the demonstration. We have a lot of experience with this.
Yeah.
And and I can't remember if there was some other point about it, but I guess podium. People always think, oh, we're going to have a podium mic, so that's great. That's great for a person who's got a piece of paper in front of them. But if you have your guitar in front of you and two guitars and two people, like, that mic's going to be here and we're going to be here, right?
Yeah.
So I just pointed out because of the education thing, because what we feel like we end up having to do around whether it's a demo performance or it's a gig with money, but nice to hear that we could get paid something for this. That's very sweet of you. Thank you for starting that process with her, Hallie. I appreciate that. Just really to speak to that, educating people about how to best use political music. So thanks, Hallie. Let's bring Bruce up.
That's just so
ahead,
good
David.
to mention that. I mean, in terms of playing at demos, I know for many people currently in the course of this workshop right now that I'm looking at, like you've all dealt with this, and Hallie as well. But like this whole musicians are sort of ancillary to the whole thing, and not and the reality is that that any musician who's any good already knows this, if you've played at demos and stuff like that, is that the most of the people at most demos anywhere in the world are mostly interested in hearing good music, and they're a lot more interested in that than they're interested in hearing boring speakers who are reading their speeches like this right in front of them from notes that they can barely read. People do like to hear good speakers, and good speakers are very rare, but there are some. But still, even good speakers, people would rather go to a demo where at least half the programming is music. And when you go to a demo anywhere in the world where half the programming or more is music, people leave it feeling jazzed and enthused. And if it's mostly speakers, even if they're good speakers, they leave feeling depressed. And then they'll put the music at the beginning or at the end, either before everybody's gotten there or after they've left, so that it has the least possible effective impact. But of course, if the music is part of the whole program, and then it has a far more impact. So. Yeah, that's I'm always having to talk to people about that, particularly in the US and the UK, but it's also notable that there is a culture of putting on demos in much of the world where you don't need to talk to people about that. And every demo I've ever sung at in Germany, more than half the programming is music. Right. And they always have good sound systems, and they always have professional sound people, and they have sound trucks in every city that are going around at the front of the demos. And they do the same thing as in Denmark, and you never need to ask people about the sound system and whether it's adequate for music, and whether they have a lectern for you or a real music setup for live performance. It's just part of the culture. And then another thing, just riffing off of that's worth mentioning, because I know that a lot of musicians out there, especially I'm just looking around here, and of course we're mostly people from the U.S. here, and you people, everybody has the impression generally that it's hard to kind of maintain an audience, and to the extent that you maintain an audience, they're going to age with you, and they're going to be kind of your audience that you got at some point, and then they're going to stick with you, and then but they're not going to be generating. You're not going to be having an audience that's sort of self-generating somehow, where you always have a new youth audience, and part of the phenomenon that some of us are familiar with, that used to be a phenomenon in the United States, and is to some extent still, like in the Unitarian churches. Like there are people in the Unitarian church scene who know Pat and Sandy's music because it's part of their education. Basically, it's part of their popular education, and that is true at say the camp. What was it? The camp in Western Massachusetts, and
Camp
the Camp
Oh.
Kinderland. Yeah, that Charlie has having that every year, and there's a lot of these kind of institutions that exist that propel them, that kind of keep this music as part of their culture, and then and also keep knowledge, like musicians need a boom stand and not a lectern mic. They keep that knowledge as part of their culture, so you don't need to educate them every year, but in Europe, that's a much bigger phenomenon. In most of the world, that's a much bigger phenomenon than it is in the United States. This phenomenon of this inability we have to kind of pass this knowledge on, because in Europe and other places they have physical spaces, and and of course the government funding, but just the physical spaces, when groups gathering in physical spaces that aren't getting kicked out by gentrification, then they can keep a culture going. And part of that culture, can involve, like say in, a place like Denmark, it involves like, the left-wing teenagers who come to the social center, you play them, David Rovics music, and then that's part of their education, and then they learn about history that way, and then they come to the gigs that their older siblings organize, and then they grow up listening to this music, and it's just self-perpetuating.
That's
And you
beautiful.
don't have to do anything other than show up.
That's
Yeah,
beautiful.
that's
after you
great.
get the audience. Yeah.
I
It's
wanna.
it's great to know. I wanted to say that you know in our gigs, three things are sort of the crucial beginning of the conversation, especially if it's a political gig. What's your sound system like? Is it set up for music, or is it just a lectern?
Or DJ.
Or yeah, right. We don't play as the coming in music. You know, we're not. That's not what we do. Our stuff is lyric. Yeah, it's content heavy, and it's going to be geared toward the topics that you're talking about. So treat us as you would a speaker, and likewise say your thank yous at the very end. That the ending music should happen before your thank yous, and your thank yous happen after that. Because once you say thank you, it's the key. It's the message to the audience to leave, and we don't want to play to the backs of people's heads, and we've done that way too many times.
Yeah.
So many times.
And I want to say, as much as we're talking about best practices, we've done everything. We've stood in the back of a truck at the border and sung through a boom stand, one mic on a boom stand, the two of us. And that's fine. We're just talking about when you have the opportunity. I want to just say that just because I don't want to give the impression that we are living in some getting everything we want at every gig and every demo. So we're not. So just to say that we're trying to share, same thing with any of I want to tell people that everything that you're putting in the chat, really helpful, and anybody can save the chat. There's a whole lot of information being shared there. Before we go to Bruce, just wanted to say that. Because we're talking about like best practices, both about how to talk about music, how to help support other musicians in this world, and all of that. So let's bring Bruce up.
I also want to say that for gigs that we drive to, we also always have boom stands in the car.
There's that.
And these best practices, these are best practices that are best for everybody, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
this is an important thing that musicians easily get called elitist and get called snobs because we talk about this kind of stuff, and then other, non-musicians often don't understand why it's important. And so they think, well, what are you going on about this stuff again? What kind of microphone it's a microphone. Who cares what kind of microphone it is? We do, everybody does. They just don't know it, So
And
it's
why do you need a
everybody.
monitor?
Right.
Because I need to hear
But
myself.
when you're in the situation, you deal with it, right?
I want to acknowledge that I thought we were going till top of the hour. Technically, we're not, but we're going to keep going till the top of the hour so that we can hear from Bruce and just close with you all. So we understand
I didn't
that
even
you
realize.
might need to look
I
at.
thought it went 3 hours long or something. No, Bruce.
Well, yeah, that's what we would do, right? All day with a break for dancing.
We're not just talking all day. I'm just getting started here.
Yes, go
Bruce.
ahead, Bruce.
Thank you. So as a volunteer organizer for a venue that tries to keep you all supported and able to do what you do,
Thank you, Bruce.
when you're talking about the situation changing, with CDs going down and things like that, at our venue, we've always had a sliding scale, and I've often done it something like $10 to $50 so that people could pay the $50, and we just split the difference with the artist so we can stay alive and you can stay alive, and the movement can keep moving forward. And we even do half for people with no wage or low wage. Basically, anybody can come for whatever they can pay, but we set a lower number just to establish an expectation that we'll hopefully get more for you all. But I'm thinking that, in the absence of the income that you were getting from CDs, it makes me feel like, we could do the same thing, but go more like 10 to 75 and say, here's your chance to support the artist as you're passing through Philadelphia. It's kind of your license fee, but it's one-stop shopping because someone doesn't have to do a separate check or write you an email that you have to deal with about it. And that's why we wanted to do that kind of sliding scale anyway. So just to put that out there with other venues, to think of a way that, the world is changing, the music world is changing, the economic structure is changing, and this is a way that you can continue to support this person, in the regular pattern of your being able to see them to get your fix, whatever that period of time is. So just to put that out there and encourage you to share that with other people at other venues to have something that can benefit both in a way that is minimal friction in the system that's going to make it less likely to happen.
Yeah, that's nice. I like that you're thinking creatively about that, and and we do want to thank you for keeping this venue going for many, many decades. Actually, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
30 years. Yeah.
Wow. Jeez.
When did you?
It's been 31 years.
I think
Yeah.
you organized one of my first gigs. Now it's been so
Yes, we
long I
did.
can't even remember. But yeah,
Yes, that was a long time ago.
yeah.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Bruce. Let's see, we can hear from.
I'm also always
okay.
curious if you check to see or are note in any way what your average is, if there is an average of what people pay, so that you know kind of where on the scale your audience tends to pay, because I think that's worthwhile.
If we do like 10 to 40, and then it averages maybe around 20, but we often get one or two people who'll pay the 40 just because they want to, it's kind of a Patreon kind of situation that they can show their support that way. Good. So I always try to do as high an upper limit as doesn't sound too ridiculous.
Yeah, no, that's great.
Good.
Yeah.
Thanks, Bruce. I see we might have enough time for all of those hands that are raised. A quick answer to Cleo: when we ask for payment, do we explain it's not for the moment of the show? We don't exactly do it that way, but it reminds me that when we do ask for payment, when we do book a show, we ask for a guarantee, and there's all sorts of conversation around that guarantee and percentage and all that. But we ask for a deposit, which means half of the guarantee then, because we need to live till the gig, which is gigs 4 months away, 6 months away, whatever it is.
Yeah.
So that's a quick tip.
And we give a window of time from the time we send the contract, so that they send back the contract and half the guarantee, because in years past I've been stiffed, before Stan and I worked together.
Now let me see if we can. I know, Boryana, you wanted to show something. Let's bring you up, and then I hope we have time for both Rick and Penny. I see you there, and we'll see what we can do. Hi, Boryana. You wanted to show something? You're muted right now. Can you unmute?
Muting myself. Just because you were talking about the mix of speakers and musicians, and I wanted to show a poster because I have it here laminated on the wall.
Nice.
Nice.
Yeah. How about that? Huh?
That was
and it was a great evening.
That's wonderful.
That's it.
Thank you. And you're wearing our shirt, which is adorable. Nice. So we like
Perfect.
to see that too.
Oh yeah, I got it. I got it from you exactly because now there are a lot of counterfeits that have a slightly different script. No. Only the autographed one.
That's very sweet. Thank you so much. All right. Okay. I think
and that design,
Ricky, put your hand
a
out.
design with those 3 words certainly did not originate with us. That that idea has been around for a long time. We put it in that particular format and purposefully put the Arabic on top, both for graphic reasons and for political reasons.
For graphic reasons, it's perfect.
Thank you. Let's see if Penny still wants to ask her question, and then we'll just have a moment to close and hear from David and hear from us. Penny, did you want to say anything? So your hand is still up, but you're muted. There she is.
There.
Okay.
Just briefly, I live in a senior housing place that has a large community room. All 3 of you have played in it.
Yeah.
My idea for it is a free venue for people who can't afford to fill or to pay the fee for larger venues. Since the pandemic, well, and before that even, there are some other small spaces in Berkeley that have more infrastructure than I do. I am wondering, I always say people bring your own stuff. I'm providing the venue. I'll put out as much publicity as I can, but that's all I can do. Mm-hmm. Is there a future for that? Is there a reason after post-pandemic to try to do that?
Yeah.
And
The short answer.
if so, how?
Yeah, the short answer is yes, because once the things do open up fully, what happens is that opening up is a slow process, and people who are much more well known and have much more industry support than we have won't be able to do the big, venues that they used to do regularly. So what they do is they drop down a tier
Move down to
the
you.
next smaller venue, and then everybody in those venues have to drop down to the next smaller venue. And so there will always be a place for smaller venues, whether or not people can travel with sound and that kind of thing. It can be a limiting factor, but there are some folks who are able to do that. So
I'm trying for a sound system. We're doing a remodel, and I'm trying to build it into the remodel, but I have no idea.
Yeah, well, and also make sure that you consult, with somebody around, what kind of sound system would best work for what you have there too.
Yeah,
because that does make a difference. You want to spend your money wisely that way. Yeah.
Thanks, Penny.
Definitely. Yeah. Thank you.
Let's just hear from David and close this thing, shut this puppy down, because we're already 15 minutes late. I thought we were top of the hour. So please, David, speak.
Well, I didn't mention that for anybody who is interested, if you scroll all the way back towards the beginning of the chat, you'll find that I sent an attachment of the sort of booklet I wrote but never published called "How to Be a Troubadour in the Age of Crowdsourcing," and it'll basically cover quite a bit of the stuff that we've all been talking about, plus a lot more little nitty-gritty details about various aspects of both writing and getting your music out there in ways that might result in people hearing it and supporting your work.
Awesome.
Great. Thanks, David.
None of us put our websites in it or even pitched any to any of you, although because that's we're here to share information, but we both have websites. Obviously, we both have Patreon pages, and we welcome your support. We're doing what we feel is important to do in the world. We're emotionally we love this job. Financially it's a roller coaster, but we love getting to see you all when we get to see you. I think the online thing is going to last. Actually, I think we're going to be having a hybrid performing experience from here on out. We have one outdoor gig already scheduled that we know is going to be hybrid with streaming at the same time. I just think it's going to keep going that way.
Yeah. So far we are looking at organizing some outdoor gigs. At least they're starting to come together. So late summer, fall, and if folks have venues or have access to venues or suggestions of folks that support this kind of music that might be interested, we would all appreciate that.
Yeah.
I'll be on the East Coast too late next month. I know most of you are in the Northeast, so that's worth mentioning. I'll be there. I'll have a gig in New York on July 24th, and otherwise nothing concrete. But I'll be in the Northeast and then England in October.
Oh, that's awesome.
And we're on the East Coast. It looks like in October.
Yeah. And so we want to thank the People's Music Network for existing in this time and throughout this time, and for Ben Grosscup, who's here, who is or might not be here by now because other workshops have started,
right?
But who's the director currently, and there he is, still there. So there are wonderful events happening all weekend. Ben, do you want to come up and say anything for a minute before we turn this?
Well, I just want to thank David Rovics and Pat and Sandy for this workshop. It's a really important topic. I feel like as a network, we've been wrestling for many decades with this question of like, what are we? Are we a professional musicians organization? Are we, somewhere in the middle? And the truth is we're all over the place. And just to have, the three of you speak to your experience about doing this kind of work professionally is really valuable to us. I've sometimes wrestled with this question of like, what more can PMN be doing to actually help performers who are members of our group to succeed more in their pursuits. And we've come up with a few small things. I posted a while ago a little bit of a response to a question Hallie raised. There's a little part of our website called Members for Hire. and it's like a prototype. It's a little underdeveloped. It doesn't do all the things that Hallie was envisioning, which I think are really interesting ideas actually, but it does at least have like a database where you as a member can like check a box and say, I'm a member for hire, and then you can put information out there about why people might want to hire you. But I think that also the way that actually artists get hired is probably not through a database as much as it is through the kind of connections you make as an individual. So that's I mean, that's been true in my own experience anyway. But it just feels like a fruitful conversation to keep having in new ways over time as we mature as an organization.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I feel similarly. It's good. I think this is nice that we've had this opportunity. We've known David for years, but we've never had this conversation together. And then to have it with folks in the room makes it all different because you've got things to add in. Not that I think we've probably griped about things together, but we haven't skill shared or brainstormed quite this much. So it's good to have
more
a
griping
format.
and less skill sharing. Yeah. Or we need more skill sharing and less griping, maybe.
Right.
But I enjoy the griping, but the skill sharing. Cool.
Yeah, and I there are things.
Here.
Yeah, and things we didn't get to. Like I know
Yeah,
Matt,
a lot.
Div, you mentioned something about Bandcamp. I don't know a whole lot about Bandcamp. I think we explored them at one point and just to do our mailing list through, but they were too small for us. And there are lots of different mechanisms like we didn't even get to.
Yeah, and let me just say
how to maintain those kinds of
that
things.
was about is Bandcamp. Their emailing format was less sophisticated than the one we were already using.
Yeah.
So that's why we didn't go with them. But I know that one thing that they do that's a benefit that's like Patreon. People come to that site who don't necessarily know us or know David, but they might find our music because we're on a platform that other artists are on.
Yeah.
So that would be a benefit to it.
Yeah, I think that definitely happens a lot on Spotify with me, with people finding my music because they're listening to some other similar artist, and then I get recommended. That's good if that can happen because of algorithms. If you have enough listeners or something, I don't know exactly what makes that happen, but I don't particularly have that experience on Bandcamp, and I would just caution anybody about Bandcamp that Bandcamp and Spotify and so many of these other corporations are set up in a way that is not set up to benefit the artists in particular. They take a really large cut of the profits of anything that you sell through Bandcamp. So it's not like Patreon in that way.
Yeah.
I mean, Patreon is just so much better set up. It's much more like for the artists. But Bandcamp, you can do the patronage thing. It's a sort of more primitive version of it, but it's like you can do the patronage thing, but there again they take a big cut of that every month from whatever you get. So I mean, I have a presence on Bandcamp just because I think it's really important to have a presence on all the platforms that are popular.
Yeah.
And that's true of all the technology too. There are reasons why platforms become popular. There are reasons why technologies become popular. And if you are working in this world of content creation and performing, you need to be on top of that stuff. Otherwise, you will just fall behind in ways that you don't want to. And not that you have to be so on top of everything, in terms of just all the finest details of everything. But if there's something as basic as like a new platform that everybody's using, you should at least try to figure out if it's something you can relate to. I mean, I've never figured out what to do with TikTok, but there's a lot of stuff like that I have nothing to do with. I did get it, and I tried to figure out if there's anything I can do with it.
You have to learn to dance.
Again, my daughter's good with TikTok. Yeah, she dances. That's the trick, maybe. Yeah.
I don't. We've heard from. There's a group called Windborn. They're 4 singers. They sing a cappella, primarily a cappella, and some of it is modern, but most of it is older, traditional stuff. They put up some 30-second clip or something. They had 1 million views. So actually, you don't have to dance right now.
Right.
Only on TikTok.
But it helps to do something very unique.
Yeah.
Something that's really cool in a matter of seconds. I think is the kind of thing that you need to be like. And I always had this problem as I used to make a living playing in the subways, and my rent was really cheap, so that was possible. But in Boston, and it was the same kind of thing. Like if you had an audience that was sticking around for 5 minutes, then that was my audience, right? But if it was the rush hour and they're 30 seconds to catch a train, I was not their performer, because I was just like, you had to listen to the story to get into the song.
Right.
But the performers who did well with the 30-second rush hour crowd, are the same people that do well on TikTok.
Right.
Like people who are playing some really flashy, interesting, exotic music, or they're naked, or whatever,
Right.
some combination. Yeah.
Yeah, glitter cowboy boots and a red accordion. It always.
Why are you only just telling me this now, Pat? That always works. All right, folks. I think we're going to stop our
thanks so much,
recording.
everybody.
So lovely to see all of you, and I'm going to stop.